Today we have a crazy story of revenge involving Pokemon. We'll get into that in a bit, but first, siblings war. I've always believed that family is everything. I still do, but not in the traditional sense of family. I know better than that now. Growing up, I was the youngest, and maybe that's why I looked up to my parents so much. My mom and dad were the best people I knew. They were hardworking and kind and always taught me that honesty and loyalty were the most important things in life. They were the ones that I knew to always say that no matter what happens, family should always stick together. And I took that to heart. I think it won't be far-fetched to say that I was close to them in a way that made me feel lucky. Whenever I had a problem, big or small, I knew I could go to them for advice. They always knew what to say, and I trusted their wisdom more than anything. They had this way of keeping our family united, even when my older siblings, Bianca and Reese, didn't always see eye to eye. I guess I never really saw the cracks that were starting to form. There was just something every time. I mean, every single time. Bianca and Reese, my older siblings, were always a bit of a mystery to me. Bianca was the oldest, and to me, she was ambitious to a fault. She was always looking for ways to get ahead, whether it was in school, her career, or just life in general. She had this relentless drive that I admired, but sometimes it felt like she was competing with everyone, even when there was no competition. She was the kind of person who always had a plan, always knew what she wanted, and didn't care much about who or what got in her way. I respected her determination, but I often wondered if she ever took a moment to just breathe and enjoy what she already had. There were days growing up when we were much younger when I tried to follow her example, but I was never as competitive as she was. Reese, on the other hand, was different. He was clever, way too clever, and the problem with that was that he knew it. Reese had a sharp mind and a sharper tongue, and he was always the one who could talk his way out of anything. Growing up, I used to think it was amazing how he could get people to see things his way, but as I got older, I started to notice that Reese's cleverness had a darker side. He wasn't just persuasive, he was manipulative. He could twist situations and words to suit his needs, and he didn't seem to care much about the consequences as long as he got what he wanted. From our parents, our extended family, and even people who did not really fall in the description of the family. However, even though we were different, I never doubted that Bianca and Reese cared about me. I thought they valued our family bond as much as I did. Looking back, I realized how naive I was. My love and trust in them blinded me to what was going on, and I didn't see the betrayal that was coming. Our family was well off, thanks to my parents' hard work. It was always understood that when the time came, the family wealth would be shared equally among the three of us. My parents believed in fairness, and they made sure we all knew that. I never doubted that things would go as planned when they passed away. We were a family after all, and families are supposed to look out for each other. But when my parents passed away, everything changed. They left behind a will, just as we expected. Bianca, Reese, and I were supposed to inherit equal shares of the family estate. At least, that's what I thought. It wasn't long before I discovered that things weren't as straightforward as they seemed, and my siblings had other plans. Plans that didn't include me. And it remains funny because I remember exactly the way everything played out, from how I found out, where I found out, to how I confronted them. I remember sitting in the lawyer's office, expecting to hear the details about how my parents' estate would be divided equally among us, just as they'd always promised. But when Mr. Carter, our family lawyer, started reading the will, something felt off. The language was different from what I'd imagined, and as he read further, the sense of dread that I always had with my siblings kept growing. Now, when I say estate, I don't mean that there was a large parcel of land that had an enormous edifice on it. No, by estate, I refer to the multiple properties that my parents had within and outside the state borders. The good thing was that my parents made sure we knew of their investments even from when we were younger. It was as if they didn't want one person to have more knowledge of their finances than any other person, so when the lawyer read out what they had, I was familiar with them. What was unfamiliar, however, was that my name wasn't mentioned at all. Bianca and Reese were listed as the sole beneficiaries of everything. The house, the money, the investments, all of it was going to them, and I was left with nothing. As the shock settled in, I started to piece together what must have happened. Bianca and Reese, with their ambition and cleverness, had found a way to manipulate the situation. Maybe it was before our parents had passed, or maybe they did something afterwards. I didn't know the details yet, but I knew one thing for certain: this wasn't what my parents had intended. They had always talked about fairness and making sure we were all taken care of. On a scale of preference, I was sure I was their most preferred child because I tried as much as possible not to cause them discomfort. so there was no way they would have left me without a single penny in their will. I felt betrayed by what had been done. I didn't know by who or why, but for some reason, I felt my siblings had a hand in it. I couldn't let it go. I had to know why they did it, so I did the only thing I could do at that point. The betrayal was eating me up inside, so I confronted Bianca and Reese at the first opportunity. I remember the anger in my voice as I demanded answers, asking them how they could do this to me, how they could betray our parents' wishes and, more importantly, betray me. Bianca barely looked up from her phone when I stormed into the room. When she did, she just laughed. A cold, mocking sound that made my blood boil. "Oh, Edmund, don't be so dramatic," she said, as if I was being unreasonable for wanting what was rightfully mine. Reese, leaning back in his chair with a smug smile I'd come to tolerate, though I despised it, just shrugged. "You've always been too naive, Edmund," he said, his tone icy and condescending. "You really thought everything would be fair? That's not how the world works. You should have seen this coming." It was then I realized just how foolish I had been. That I was nothing more than an obstacle in their way, and they had no regrets about pushing me aside. They did not expect me to fight back. I would not have expected myself to fight back either, but something made me go for it, and whatever that something was, it was all I needed to pay the thieving siblings I had a taste of the bitter medicine they had served me. That's when I decided to confide in my friend Mark, who had a solid understanding of the law. He was not actively practicing law for reasons he never divulged to me, but he was darn good at it. That was why I went to him. As I poured out my frustrations, Mark listened carefully. When I finished, he paused for a moment and then asked me something that no one else had. "Have you checked if there were any previous versions of the will?" That question caught me off guard. I hadn't thought about that. All I could focus on was the betrayal I felt in the present. Because what if there were previous versions of the will? Does that not all go to prove my siblings right in showing that my parents at some point thought me undeserving of a share of their inheritance? Something in Mark's question and the way he asked it gave me some form of hope. I immediately contacted Mr. Carter, our family lawyer, and asked if there were any earlier versions of the will. To my surprise, there were several, each one updated as my parents acquired new properties or investments. Mark suggested that I request for the previous versions to do a cross-check on the trend the division of my parents took over the years. I am thankful for this day that I decided to heed his advice, even though at the time it all felt like a waste of time. Mr. Carter was kind enough to present the copies of what I requested. Perhaps he felt sorry for me because I got nothing from my parents. What stood out, though, was a clause in the very first will I had never known about. It clearly stated that any will that did not cover all three children, me, Bianca, and Reese, should be considered void. That was the first ray of light in everything. It was enough grounds for me to argue that the will that was read should be voided, but that meant that we would have to bank on the version of the will before the one that was read to us. I didn't want that. My reason was simple. If my siblings could go out of their way to leave me without a penny from our parents, I could do the same, in a much more legal way. All I had to do was find evidence that they had manipulated the will somehow and get them in front of a judge. I combed through old emails, text messages, and documents searching for anything that might indicate foul play. I remembered times when Reese had been unusually involved in my parents' financial decisions, always with a seemingly helpful suggestion. I found messages where Bianca hinted to our parents that I was irresponsible with money, subtly planting doubts about my ability to handle an inheritance. The more I dug, the clearer it became. They had been planning this for a long time. Mark guided me through the process, making sure we built a strong case. He advised me to take the matter to court rather than try to settle it quietly. "You'll get a better ruling in court," he said. "Judges don't take kindly to manipulation, especially when it involves family." So, with Mark's help, I filed the lawsuit and prepared for the battle ahead. I could only hope that justice would prevail and that, in the end, I'd walk away with my head held high. From the expression that Bianca and Reese had at the beginning of the court session, you could tell that they thought it was going to be an easy walk for them. They were called to state their case. They tried to defend their actions, spinning stories about why the final will was the true reflection of our parents' wishes. But as they spoke, it became clear that their arguments were thin not just to me but to the entire court. My lawyer presented the evidence we had gathered. Emails, text messages, and documents that showed how Bianca and Reese had influenced our parents in their vulnerable state to change their will against their real wishes. The clause from the original will that we had found was the final cement to our case. In the end, the judge could not rule totally in my favor to rid them of any inheritance. However, it was evident that they were in the wrong, and they had to pay a calculated fee based on the months that we used to battle the will, including my lawyer fee, all out of their purse. Then, we went back to the last version of the will before the manipulated one. Honestly, I'm curious if that original will's clause is actually enforceable. Like, you mean to tell me that at some point they decide, we're going to change our will up and we actually don't want one of our kids to get inheritance? That's just null and void because of that original clause in their original will? Like, if the parents wrote in the third will, say, a clause that says, actually, we were wrong upon reflection and we actually don't want one kid to get stuff, so forget this clause from our first will, would that all of a sudden make the third will legitimate? I guess what I'm trying to say is, this is why I'm not a lawyer. Also, hi, I'm Steven, and if you guys enjoy crazy stories of revenge, it would be amazing if you left a like or left a review if you're listening to my podcast. That said, our next story is, you'll never know when the tables will turn when you are being wicked. My name is Mira, and I've spent over a decade climbing the corporate ladder in marketing. I've always been the type of person who wants to please everyone, whether it's my boss, my coworkers, or even my clients. It's just who I am, constantly putting others first, even if it means sacrificing my own well-being. My journey in marketing started right after college. I joined a mid-sized retail company that wasn't exactly a household name, but it had potential. I've had many experiences with many bosses, right from when I was just an intern with zeal and passion for the world I was about to enter. Short-tempered bosses, nice ones, even the ones that just can't wait till everything is perfectly done and eventually have to do the assigned work themselves. But nothing could have prepared me for Pamela. Pamela was our new VP of marketing. A few months after she joined us, the rumor mill was already buzzing. Apparently, she wasn't the first choice for the job. In fact, she was the fourth pick, brought in only to appease some shareholders who were growing impatient with the company's direction. I could tell she was trouble from the moment she stepped into the office. She was in her 40s, confident, and had this air of superiority about her. Something was unsettling about the way she carried herself, like she was always plotting her next move. Given my role, I knew I'd have to work closely with her, but I had no idea how much she would turn my life upside down. It didn't take long for Pamela to start making her presence felt. She was demanding and manipulative and seemed to enjoy making others squirm. Little did I know, I was about to become her favorite target. Pamela's true nature became evident almost immediately. At first, I tried to give her the benefit of the doubt. Maybe she was just trying to assert her authority in a new role. But soon, it became clear that her domineering behavior wasn't just a phase. It was who she really was. She started piling on the work, assigning me tasks that clearly should have been her responsibility. It wasn't just extra work, it was the kind of work that would take hours, if not days, to complete properly. She would drop by my desk unannounced, dump a stack of files, and say, "I need these reports by tomorrow morning. Oh, and make sure they're perfect. I don't want to look bad." I tried my best to keep up, but it was like trying to juggle flaming torches while riding a unicycle. No matter how hard I worked, there was always more to do. And the worst part? Pamela would swoop in at the last minute, take credit for everything good, and leave me to clean up the mess she'd created. It wasn't just the workload that made things unbearable. Pamela's reckless spending and poor management decisions were causing chaos in the department. She would approve ridiculous budgets for projects that had no chance of succeeding, then blame the team when things inevitably went wrong. I found myself working late into the night trying to fix problems that shouldn't have existed in the first place. Pamela's behavior outside of work was just as troubling. She would often show up late, sometimes not arriving until after lunch. When she did finally grace us with her presence, she would spend more time planning company parties and social events than actually doing her job. It was like she was more interested in playing the part of a VP than actually being one. But despite everything, I kept my head down and tried to keep the department running smoothly. It wasn't easy, but I'd faced difficult bosses before. I just had to find a way to survive Pamela's reign of terror. Little did I know, this was just the beginning. The workload Pamela dumped on me quickly became unbearable. Every day I found myself staying late at the office, and when I finally got home, the work didn't stop. I'd grab a quick dinner and then sit down at my kitchen table with my laptop, trying to keep up with the endless demands. My family noticed the change. I was always tired, irritable, and distant, but I kept telling myself it was just a rough patch, something I could push through if I just worked hard enough. But the stress was relentless. My body started to break down under the pressure. It began with the constant headaches. Then came the sleepless nights, and eventually my immune system gave up on me. What I thought was just a bad cold turned into something much worse. I developed a serious infection that spiraled out of control, leading to sepsis. The next thing I knew, I was in a hospital bed hooked up to IVs with doctors telling me I was lucky to be alive. Lying in that hospital bed, I had a lot of time to think. The realization hit me hard. I had been so consumed with trying to please Pamela and keep the department afloat that I had completely neglected my own health and family. I saw how my constant need to make everyone happy had led me to this breaking point. I knew something had to change. I couldn't keep living like this, sacrificing myself for a job that didn't care about me. As I began to recover, I promised myself that when I returned to work, things would be different. I needed to take control of my life again, and that meant no more letting people like Pamela walk all over me. Still recovering at home, I felt uneasy about how things were going at work in my absence. I decided to check my work email just to stay in the loop, but what I found was beyond anything I could have imagined. I started with my inbox, but curiosity got the better of me and I dug into Pamela's emails as well. After all, I had access as her second in command. What I discovered made my blood boil. There in black and white were emails Pamela had sent to her friends, complaining about how long I was taking to recover from sepsis, as if I could just snap my fingers and be back at work. "She's so weak," Pamela had written. "I don't understand why she can't just shake it off and get back here. I'm drowning without her, and I can't find any of her files. Even though she insists they're all on the shared drive, it's pathetic. The nerve of her." But it got worse. As I read further, I found emails where Pamela outlined her real plans. She was using my absence as an opportunity to set me up as the scapegoat for the company's declining sales. Pamela had been blaming me for everything that went wrong while I was away, twisting facts to make it look like I was incompetent. And the kicker? She was even planning to fire me under false pretenses if things didn't improve soon. The shock of her betrayal hit me hard. But as I sat there, I felt a new resolve growing inside me. Pamela had underestimated me and she was about to find out just how big a mistake that was. I knew I couldn't just sit back and let Pamela ruin my career. It was time to fight back. But I had to be smart about it. No rash decisions, no mistakes. First, I needed to gather solid evidence that would expose her unethical behavior once and for all. I started by combing through every email, every budget report, and every document that had Pamela's fingerprints on it. I found plenty. Emails where she misrepresented facts, budget reports that she had tampered with, and plans she had concocted to blame me for everything that went wrong. It was all there, just waiting to be used against her. I organized everything meticulously, making sure each piece of evidence was easy to follow. But I knew I couldn't do this alone. I needed someone I could trust, someone who had the knowledge and the integrity to back me up. That's when I thought of Lois, a sharp, no-nonsense accountant who had always been supportive. Lois was in her 50s with decades of experience, and she had seen it all. If anyone could help me take Pamela down, it was Lois. I reached out to Lois and explained the situation. She was appalled by what Pamela had been doing and agreed to help. Together, we formulated a plan. I would slip the incriminating evidence into the invoices that were set to be reviewed by accounting. Lois would then make sure that upper management saw the documents, ensuring that Pamela's corruption was exposed. Everything was set, the trap was laid, and now all I had to do was wait for the right moment to spring it. Returning to work, I knew I had to play it cool. Pamela had no idea I was onto her, and I needed to keep it that way. I followed her orders, acting like the obedient employee she thought I was, but this time, I had a hidden agenda. When it came time to drop off the usual stack of invoices, I made sure the incriminating documents were slipped in among them. I handed the pile to Lois, giving her a knowing look. She nodded subtly. Our plan was in motion. Lois worked quickly, reviewing the documents and realizing the extent of Pamela's misconduct. The evidence was clear. There was no way Pamela could wriggle out of this. Lois escalated the issue, passing everything to upper management with a detailed report that left no room for doubt. The wheels of justice were now turning. Within a week, the inevitable happened. Pamela was called into a meeting with the company's top executives. They confronted her with the evidence: emails, falsified budgets, and reports she had doctored. Pamela tried to bluster her way out of it, but the proof was overwhelming. She had no choice but to face the consequences. Pamela was fired on the spot for gross misconduct and falsifying company records. I was summoned to the CEO's office shortly after. I expected a formal conversation, but instead, the CEO personally apologized for everything I had been through. He praised my professionalism and resilience, and as a token of appreciation, he offered me a fully paid vacation. It was a kind gesture, but as much as I appreciated it, I knew deep down that it wasn't enough to keep me there. I stayed with the company for another year, but the experience with Pamela had changed me. There were still lingering issues in the company, and I realized that it was time for a fresh start. So, with a sense of closure and newfound strength, I decided to move on and leave the past behind. Years passed, and my life took a turn for the better. I had moved on to a new job, one where I was truly valued. My new boss, Mike, was everything Pamela wasn't: kind, supportive, and genuinely interested in helping his team succeed. Under his leadership, I thrived. I was healthier, happier, and more confident in my abilities. The lessons I learned during my time with Pamela had made me stronger, and I no longer felt the need to please everyone at the expense of my own well-being. One afternoon, as I was reviewing job applications for an open position on my team, a familiar name caught my eye: Pamela. I couldn't believe it. I stared at the screen, reading her resume over and over. Her career had taken a sharp downturn since she left the company, and now she was desperate for a job. The woman who had once tried to ruin me was now asking for my help. I took a moment to think it over. Part of me wanted to ignore the application, pretend I hadn't seen it. But another part of me knew that this was the moment I had been waiting for. The moment when I could finally put the past behind me. Pamela's application was disqualified. I felt no need to reach out or confront her. The simple act of disqualifying her was enough. I felt a deep sense of closure knowing that justice had finally been served for a second time in a way that was fitting. The past was truly behind me, and I was free. Sometimes I wonder if I should have passed her to the next stage, which was the oral interview, so she could come face to face with me before I tell her why she won't be employed. What do you think I should have done? So to answer OP's question at the end of the story, I think while in theory it would have been a fun thing to have that oral interview and turn them down to their face, maybe it would have somehow reflected on you badly, maybe word would get back to other people. I don't know if like the higher management wherever OP works now would appreciate OP using past grudges to kind of rub it in their face like that in this oral interview. So I think it's probably for the best that it just stuck to what OP did. That said, our next story is, it's not about who cries first, it's who laughs last. Middle school in the early 2000s wasn't too bad for me, all things considered. My friends and I spent our days worrying about tests, who liked who, and how to survive gym class. Back then, having a phone was a big deal, but I didn't have one of those fancy new smartphones. I had a prepaid phone, the kind where every minute and text counted. It wasn't much, but it was my lifeline. My parents loaded it with just enough balance to keep in touch after school, and I had to make every cent stretch. My friends knew this and respected it. They would only text when necessary and never called unless it was something important. It was an unspoken rule, one we all understood. Our group was tight-knit. We had each other's backs and everyone was mindful of my limited phone balance. We used our phones to coordinate after-school plans, send quick updates, and keep our group chat alive. Every text mattered, and my friends got that, except for Derek. Derek was the new kid who joined our group midway through the year. At first, he seemed fun, always full of energy and ideas for pranks or games, but it didn't take long before I noticed how he was different. Derek had a way of pushing buttons, crossing lines that none of us had drawn. He didn't seem to care about my phone situation, or maybe he just didn't get it. Either way, it wasn't long before his antics started causing problems, especially for me. It all went down on a Friday afternoon. I was at home finishing up some homework when my phone buzzed. I didn't think much of it. Just another text, probably from one of my friends. But then it buzzed again and again. Soon, my phone was buzzing non-stop. When I picked it up, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Derek, the new guy who had somehow wormed his way into our group, had sent me over 100 picture messages in less than an hour. At first, I thought it was a glitch, but when I opened a few, I saw that they were all just random images, doodles, memes, and photos of nonsense. He was doing this on purpose. I knew my prepaid balance was limited, and every one of those picture messages cost me money. As the messages kept coming, I could almost feel the money draining from my account. I tried texting him to stop, but he just sent more. By the time it ended, my balance was completely wiped out, leaving me with nothing but a $40 loss and a bitter taste in my mouth. I was furious. I couldn't believe Derek had done something so spiteful, and for what? A laugh? I tried talking to him the next day at school, hoping he'd apologize and maybe even offer to pay me back. But Derek just shrugged it off like it was no big deal, laughing as if I was overreacting. I felt helpless, like I'd been punched in the gut. That $40 was a lot to me, and he didn't care at all. I even tried to talk to the other guys in our group, hoping they would back me up, but most of them just said I should let it go. It wasn't worth the fight, they said, but it sure didn't feel that way to me. When I got home that night, I told my dad everything. I explained how Derek had bombarded my phone with messages and how I'd lost all my prepaid balance because of it. I thought my dad would be just as mad as I was, but instead, he just sighed and said, "It's not worth the hassle, kiddo. We'll get your number changed and block his number. He's not worth your time." We went to the phone store the next day. My dad explained the situation and they helped us get a new number and block Derek from contacting me. It brought a small sense of relief, but the anger didn't go away. I couldn't shake the feeling of being wronged, of having something taken from me that I couldn't get back. Sure, I got a new phone with an unlimited plan later on, but the scar Derek left was more than just financial, it was personal, and it was something I wouldn't forget. As time went on, Derek's behavior only got worse. What started as annoying pranks quickly turned into something more sinister. He started picking fights with other kids, spreading rumors, and generally making himself unbearable to be around. Our group couldn't handle Derek's growing toxicity anymore. It wasn't long before we collectively decided to cut him out. He just wasn't worth the trouble. Once Derek was out of our circle, he became a loner at school. His reputation for being a troublemaker spread quickly, and soon, no one wanted to be associated with him. The more isolated he became, the more bitter and aggressive he grew. Eventually, his parents decided to transfer him to another school, hoping a fresh start would change his ways. I didn't see or hear about Derek after that, and frankly, I was glad. Life moved on, and so did I. In contrast, I thrived. Without Derek's negative influence, our group returned to its usual fun and supportive dynamic. I focused on my studies, got involved in school activities, and built strong friendships that lasted through high school and beyond. By the time I graduated, Derek was nothing more than a bad memory, a footnote in my middle school experience. Years later, after finishing college, I returned home for a break before starting my first real job. Life had changed in so many ways. I had matured, gained new experiences, and largely forgotten about the petty drama of middle school. Derek was a distant memory, buried under years of personal growth and new adventures. But sometimes, life has a funny way of digging up the past. One weekend, while staying with my parents, I decided to check out some local garage sales, a hobby I'd picked up in college. Little did I know that this simple outing would bring Derek back into my life in the most unexpected way. Visiting garage sales had become a bit of a weekend ritual for me. There's something about the thrill of the hunt, never knowing what you might find. That Saturday morning, I had no particular plan, just a list of addresses from an online ad. I drove from one sale to the next, picking up a few knickknacks here and there. It wasn't until I turned onto a quiet suburban street that something caught my eye. A familiar face. There she was, Derek's mother, running a garage sale on her front lawn. She hadn't aged much since I last saw her, but it was clear she didn't recognize me as I walked up the driveway. She greeted me with a polite smile, completely unaware of our shared history, but I remembered her, and more importantly, I remembered Derek. As I started browsing the tables, a thought popped into my head. Derek had been obsessed with Pokemon back in the day. If there was anything valuable to be found here, it would be from his old collection. My heart started racing as I moved from one table to the next, trying to appear casual while my mind was spinning with possibilities. Could it be here? Could this be my chance for a little poetic justice? I was just about to give up when I noticed a stack of old boxes tucked away in a corner of the garage. Curious, I asked Derek's mom if I could take a look. Sure, she said. It's just some of Derek's old stuff. He left it here years ago. My pulse quickened as I opened the first box. Inside, I found neatly organized binders filled with rare Pokemon cards, some still in mint condition. Beneath the cards were video games, consoles, and even a few Lego sets, all in pristine condition. This was it, the mother lode. I had to fight to keep a straight face as I examined the items. Inside, I was doing cartwheels, but on the outside, I remained calm, nodding thoughtfully as if I was just mildly interested. The value of this collection was easily in the thousands, and here I was, about to buy it for next to nothing. This was my moment, my chance to turn the tables on Derek after all these years. I took a deep breath, knowing I had to play this carefully. "How much for these boxes?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Derek's mom glanced at the stack, clearly unaware of what she had on her hands. "Oh, I don't know," she said with a shrug. How about $400 for everything? $400? I could hardly believe my luck. I was staring at a collection worth at least 10 times that amount, but I knew I couldn't let my excitement show. I pretended to think it over for a moment as if I wasn't sure. "Well, that seems fair," I finally said, nodding as if I was doing her a favor by taking it off her hands. Inside, I was practically bursting with excitement. I told her I'd go grab the cash from an ATM nearby. On the drive there, I couldn't stop grinning. This was more than just a great deal. It felt like fate, like the universe was finally giving me a chance to settle the score. I returned with the money, handed it over, and started loading the boxes into my dad's truck. I drove away with the truck full of boxes, feeling a sense of closure. Derek had unknowingly given me the means to change my life, and I wasn't about to let this opportunity slip through my fingers. Once I got home, I knew I needed help to truly understand the treasure I had just acquired. My uncle was the first person who came to mind. He'd been selling things on eBay for years, and he knew how to get top dollar for collectibles like these. I called him up and explained the situation. He was intrigued and offered to help me sort through everything. The next few days were a whirlwind of cataloging and research. My uncle and I spent hours carefully examining each item, looking up prices online, and estimating the value of the collection. I was blown away by how much some of the Pokemon cards and games were worth. My uncle was just as amazed, confirming that this collection was something special. When we finished, the estimated total value came to around $40,000. I couldn't believe it. $40,000! The irony hit me like a ton of bricks. Derek had taken $40 from me all those years ago, and now his childhood treasures were about to repay me 1,000 times over. It was the kind of poetic justice you only hear about in stories. Over the summer, my uncle and I got to work selling the collection piece by piece. It was a long process, but with each sale, I felt a little more satisfied. My uncle took small cuts for his efforts, but that didn't bother me at all. Without his help, I wouldn't have known where to start. By the time we'd sold everything, I'd made enough money to pay off my student loans and put a down payment on a new car. The feeling of walking into the dealership and driving away in my new ride was incredible. All I could think about was how this money had come from a place I never expected. A middle school betrayal that had haunted me for years. I don't know if I'll ever see Derek again, and frankly, I don't think I care. Hopefully one day he'll stumble upon this post and realize who finally had the last laugh after all those years of his mindless, foolish prank. Is it weird of me to say that, I could feel like this would be the origin story of a new John Wick? Not actually John Wick, but adjacent to John Wick. But instead of the dog, it's the Pokemon card collection. I mean, to be fair, if I was Derek and I found out my Pokemon card collection, games, consoles, Lego sets were all gone, that would be my villain origin story. But with that being said, that's all the time we have for today. Now, if you want to hear another absolutely crazy revenge story, check out that video on the left. Or if you missed my latest video, check out that video on the right. That said, I'll see you all next time with some more stories.